I think she wants to take it out because some
Don't share that with other people. Like, tell her like we don't have that
Good morning. How's everyone this morning? Yeah, that's pretty much normal. So all things are normal at the moment. It takes a minute to herd the chickens. Good morning. I feel so like it does. Like, are we done yet? Good morning, everyone. Good to see everyone this morning. Weather's decent. It's not cold. It's not hot. A little overcast, like a little more sun. All those things. All right. Good morning, Wally.
Good morning.
Good to see you, brother. All right, so this morning we're going to continue in Hebrews. We're up to chapter 9. And as we've said at least 9 times, Hebrews is a comparative study. It compares Christ to a whole host of other characters or to the Hebrew system. And that's really what we're going to look at today. And so we're going to spend our time in chapter 9 today, and the plan is to complete chapter 9. Chapter 9 has some interesting pieces at the beginning. I used Wayne Jackson's kind of outline here to kind of divide this up into these sections. And really the center sections are kind of the heart of it, but they don't really require a lot of commentary because the author does a very good job of saying what he says and meaning what he says, right? So it's pretty straightforward. The first part, if there's any part that's sometimes hard to understand, it's the first section, 1 through 10. So we'll spend a little time there and maybe a little more time at the end. So let's begin. So in Hebrews, we're going to read the first 10. I got to adjust my scale here so I can read. First Hebrews chapter 9, verse 1 through Hebrews chapter 9, verse 10. Read with me if you will. Now, even the first covenant had regulations for worship and an earthly place of holiness. For a tent was prepared, the first section in which were the lampstand and the table and the bread of the presence. It is called the holy place. Verse 3. Behold, the second curtain was a second section called the most holy place, having the golden altar of incense and the ark of the covenant, covered on all sides with gold, in which it was a golden urn holding the manna, and Aaron's staff that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. Verse 5. Above it were the cherubim of glory, overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail. Verse 6. These preparations having thus been made, the priests go regularly into the section performing the ritual duties, but into the second only the high priest goes, and he but once a year, and not without taking blood, for he offers for himself and for the unintentional sins of the people. By this, the Holy Spirit indicates that the way into the holy places is not yet opened as long as the first section is still standing. Verse 9, which is symbolic of the present age. According to this arrangement, gifts and sacrifices are offered that cannot perfect the conscience of the worshiper, but deal only with food and drink and various washings, regulations for the body imposed until the day of Reformation. All right, that's the first 10 verses. So there's some opportunity here in these first 10 verses. One of the things that's noticed, I guess the first thing I want to call out is the very first rule of any Bible study is context. Context. What is the author trying to get across? What the author is trying to set up here is a comparison. Hebrews is a comparative study. So he's going to set up, what does the old system, the tabernacle system, look like? What are its components? And then later on he will make a comparison to the heavenly, right, or the ultimate. So this section is intended to set up that contrast, that comparison for the readers of this book. So one of the things we want to notice is verse 4. Just for a second. Let's go back to verse 4. Having the golden altar of incense and the ark of the covenant covered on all sides with gold, in which it was the golden urn holding the manna and Aaron's staff that budded, and the table of the covenant. This is describing the contents or the furniture that is within the two sanctuaries. You have the outside, which we'll look at. You have the courtyard. Then you have the holy place. And then there's a second tent, essentially, and you have the most holy place. What is described here, and I think does someone have New King James? Do I have a New King James? Gordon? Can you read verse 4? Hebrews 9.
Golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid on all sides with gold. Which were the golden pot that had the manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I'll read it again. This is Hebrews 9, verse 4. This is the New King James. And I want you to contrast it to the ESV, right? So the ESV is up here on the screen. Verse 4, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot that had the manna and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. There is some opportunity here for confusion, right? Because many of the translations put in this idea. There I go here. The golden altar of incense. And if you're just a casual reader here, you're putting the golden altar of incense inside the tent with the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant is. But if we look, the golden altar of incense actually sits inside the Holy, not the Holy of Holies. So the furniture, so if we look at the whole scene, so you have the tent. This is the tabernacle space, right? You have the children of Israel camped around it, and the directions here matter, north, south, east, and west. But on the outside, you have the altar, right? And this is a movable altar, so it moves. You have the golden basin where the priest wash. Washing there, I think, has some symbolic reference. I think you can make a reference here to they have to wash and cleanse themselves before they can enter into the holy place. And on the Day of Atonement, the high priest had to wash himself multiple times, actually. There was a whole ritual process, but he would wash, change clothes, and then go in. So he had to clean himself before he could enter into these spaces where God would be. I think you could reasonably make a connection there to baptism. Because all of these symbols, all of these pieces they are the type, and the church and Christ in heaven are the antitypes, the true, right? These are the shadows, these are the true. So all of these have a symbolic connection to the next covenant. So you have the altar, you have the basin, you have a larger tent, and then inside of that you also have the smaller tent. So you can only enter in through here after you've cleansed. And inside the holy is the light, or the menorah. You have the table with the showbread, and each on the table are 12 loaves of bread, one representing each of the tribes, and then frankincense, and then you have the altar of incense. It's inside of this room. And this altar of incense was offered on that altar twice a day, right? Twice a day. They went in the morning and in the evening, and they would offer incense to God on that altar. Only once a year would you enter into the most holy of holies, and only the high priest could do so. And when he would do that, if you look at Leviticus 16, what you see is that he would have a bull, and he would have the 2 goats, then he would have a ram. The part of that process is he would have the blood of the bull, and then he would need to cleanse himself, wash himself, change his clothes into pure white linen, another symbolic picture, right? And then he would take the censer, a golden censer, take coals from the altar, and he would enter into the Holy of Holies. And then he would put the incense upon that censer, and that would fill that space with incense, with smoke. And it essentially created a place where God could be present and he could be present in the same space. But there was a cloud between them. Right, and that censer was what he used to carry the coals in. He would apply the incense to it, and it would fill that space. Don, did I see a hand? No? All right, any questions? All right. Let's see, verse 8. Let me back up. Verse 8. Let's look at that for just a second. By this, the Holy Spirit indicates that the way into the holy places, plural, is not yet opened as long as the first section is still standing. Verse 9, which is symbolic of the present age. As long as the tabernacle was needed and relied upon, the way to God cannot be shown. The way to God was not shown as long as the Levitical priesthood was in place. The way to God did not become obvious until Jesus revealed it after his death, burial, and resurrection. In John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. When Jesus died, the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom. We see that in Matthew 27, verse 51. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook and the rocks split. So as long as this structure, this system, and there was a whole system here, this structure and this system existed, the way into the holy or into the Holy of Holies was constrained. Only the Levitical priest could enter into the holy place, and only the high priest once a year could enter into the most holy. So these were shadows of the end, right? But now with Christ, he is the way, the truth, and the life. You, as a child of God, act as a priest, and you enter into this holy realm. We have Christ as our mediator between us and God. Christ has now opened the way, and the old system is officially set aside. All right, any questions, comments? All right. Is there anything here I wanted to share? The first covenant had, notice the past tense regulations for sacred worship on earth in the Mosaic dispensation. First, there was a tabernacle. This was a movable tent, right? So that was part of its design, is that it was not a permanent thing. The system we are under today, the Christian system, is permanent. One of the pieces that is compared here is that with the Levitical priesthood, you always had the changing of priests because you had a new high priest. The high priest would be anointed, be appointed, and at some point, like human beings do, we die, right? And another one had to be appointed and anointed, and then another one, and another one. One of the contrasts that's frequently made here is that we have a permanent high priest, and he is Christ. And he is not sitting in a physical tent. He is in heaven itself. The holy place is. All right, the holy place represented God's house. This is an interesting type for you to ponder. So the holy place, which would be this section, right? Where the light, the altar of incense, and the showbread. This, in a sense, was a type for the church. And this is obviously the type for heaven itself, where the presence of God is.
Carol,
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, since that's a good visual depiction there, that first, I just for a visual understanding. So when Christ died and the curtain was ripped,
Yeah.
would it be the first curtain or the last curtain?
The second one right here.
The second, okay. I just
And
wanted.
remember, this is the tabernacle that God instructed Moses to build. This was their mobile worship station, right? Literally, they would disassemble this whole thing and pick it up and move, and they did this for 40 years. Right, so there was a fairly sophisticated assembly and disassembly process, and all of this pieces moved. When Christ was on earth, there was the temple, and those were more fixed, right? The temple wasn't moving. And in the temple, you had the holy place and you had the most holy. And they had the curtain that separated them. And when Christ died, that curtain that separated the holy from the most holy was ripped apart. symbolically saying the way access to God is now open to all of us. You don't have to be a Levitical priest. You don't have to be a high priest now to approach God. You can approach God. You, if you are a child of God, you are a priest or priestess. You offer your prayers to God. You don't need a priest to be between you and God. You can pray to God. You have the intermediary, you have the mediator, which is Christ on our behalf now sitting in heaven, the Holy of Holies. So he is our mediator now. But you now have direct access essentially to God. That veil has been ripped. The old has been dispensed.
Harold,
Yes.
verses 3 and 4, I'm trying to square my version with the location of the altar.
Yep.
You just mentioned the casual reading, but I'm trying to understand how the altar was in the holy place and not in the most holy place.
It was not. This is an opportunity where our translations may or may not actually help us. Because if you read I think in this case, the New King James does a better job. And in the New King James, which had the golden censer and the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the golden censer is not one of the pieces of furniture that was described in the Levitical system that Moses was to create. The furniture would have been this altar of incense, which our translation says was in the Holy of Holies. It was not. It was in the Holy.
What is a censer?
The censer is effective. You can come up with a million ways to describe it, but basically it's some type of pan or object that will hold coals. I think of it like a bowl, and I'm sure, but it was overlaid with gold, and they would go to the altar, the main altar up here, and that altar was lit all the time. There was always fire going in that altar while it was stationary. So they would, on the Day of Atonement, the priest would go to the altar, collect coals from the golden altar, and then the very first, before he took blood in, he would go in with the censer inside the Holy of Holies, and he would lay incense on that censer, and that would fill that small space. And that allowed there was essentially a sense where God could now enter it because he was masked to the high priest. But he was in that cloud. And the censer was used to bring the incense inside of the Holy of Holies to create that cloud.
So the New King James says censer.
Yes.
I'm not sure what my version is.
Altar. And the same, and I know, see, that's where,
I hate to bog you down with all this. It's
the same word is used for both, right? So this is where I think you have to allow the context to help clarify what is being said. And I think the context here too, I don't want to get too far off on the censer versus the altar, because that's not the point that the author is trying to make. Because what the author is setting up here is, here's the old, here's its implements, here's its purpose essentially, and he's going to contrast that to the new. Did I see a couple hands back there? Go.
Going to Day of Abiding, when they offer the strange incense,
Yep.
where was that? Did they use it, what you're talking about, or was something else?
They used a censer, but they took the coals off the wrong fire. And they died as a result.
On your screen, I don't see that but one type of fire there, so where would you think that?
I think that this is for speculation now, right?
Yeah.
But like there would be lots of other things going on. There would be fires maybe kindling for water to warm up the basin. They took coals off of a different fire, not this one. And they were offering sincere worship. Right? They seen the fire from heaven come down and consume. That would have to be awe-inspiring. Nothing ever seen like that before. Fire from heaven consumes all of these offerings that are sitting on that altar. And they scoop up coals in their exuberance and put incense on it and offer it before God. What they did was sincere. And they were trying to worship God in His awesomeness. But they didn't do what God had asked.
They have been sincerely wrong.
They were sincerely wrong. Because what God asked is not complicated. But by not doing what He asked, you're saying what you say doesn't matter. And you get into this whole conversation of holy, treating God as holy, as opposed to treating Him profanely. They chose to profane God by taking common, ordinary coals off of any fire, and they used that to offer worship. And that was not acceptable. All right. Good.
Well, we see how much of this, indeed all of it, foreshadows Christ, the church, coming to God through Christ alone. If we tend to think, wow, God must have really been grumpy that day because, he did that. If He allows that type of departure, then the picture of Christ in true worship, the type-antitype relationship becomes distorted. It's unable to be understood. And so I think He's protecting what He's doing to bring about a clear understanding of Christ and Christ worship and the whole New Testament system
Right.
of grace through Christ.
Right.
So, like I used to just go, wow, same with Uzziah touching the ark, right? That just, whoa.
Uzziah touched it when he was trying to help.
It's occasions where if things are allowed, I don't know why God killed him as opposed to correcting. I'm not saying I know why, but what I'm saying is that's not really a small thing.
It's
For us, it's huge that God would preserve His
That those-
plan and His teaching and His preparation for the coming of Jesus for us to understand.
I think both of those examples are preserved for us and this all right, this will go into second opinions. Because God is trying to help us see the distinction between treating Him as holy or treating Him in a profane manner, which He finds unacceptable. And profane doesn't mean bad words coming out of your mouth. Profane means common, ordinary, treating Him as if He's just another ordinary God. That is not acceptable to God the Father. You have to treat Him as He is, holy. All right, we're going to quickly move because we are quickly running out of time. All right, the altar of incense. If you want to read about the altar of incense, a good reference for you would be Exodus chapter 30. You can read through that, and it gives you a nice description of this altar. Just very quickly, verse 7, and Aaron shall burn fragrant incense on it every morning. When he dresses the lamps, he shall burn it. And when Aaron sets up the lamps at twilight, he shall burn on it. So this altar was used every day, twice a day. And it's set in the holy. All right. The Ark of the Covenant. This is just we don't actually know what it looks like, but this is kind of a reasonable representation where you have the ark. Within it are the contents of the manna, the Aaron's staff, and the stone tablets. It was made of acacia wood, and it was covered in gold. Imagine picking that puppy up, right? When they had to move, all of this stuff disassembled, and the priest carried it, or at the very least the Levites carried it. I'm sure that was not a 20-pound backpack they were hacking around. That sucker had some weight. The interesting part is the top is, you have the cherubims, which represent, or described as angels or attendants to God. So they're reflected here. Their wings are touching, and then the seat is where he would sprinkle the blood, and the presence of God would come down between into the smoke above the mercy seat. A good reference, if you want to read some of the details about that, is Exodus 25 is a good place to read the details. In 25:20, the cherubim shall spread out their wings above, overshadowing the mercy seat with their wings, their faces one to another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubim be. All right. We're going to keep going. All right, verses 11 through 14. Let's read this quickly here. See if I can make my screen bigger. I've got old eyes. All right, verse 11. But when Christ appeared as high priest, as the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, verse 12, he entered once for all into the holy places, heaven itself, not by the means of the blood of goats and calves, but by the means of his own blood, thus securing eternal redemption. Verse 13, for if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So this is I think the author does a nice job here of saying what he means and means what he says. There is a lot of good material here for you to ponder. Verse 11, the good things can be described as all the blessings associated with the new covenant. The tabernacle of the Old Testament is contrasted with the tabernacle of Jesus serves, and Jesus is serving the greater tabernacle in heaven. So the verse 10 verses is setting up this contrast for you to see. Earthly and all of its requirements and rules and process comparing to Christ, now serving as our high priest in heaven itself. So it's not a temporary situation any longer. The word redemption was a word used of a slave who has been set free. It can also mean liberation or deliverance. The idea is that Jesus' death on the cross set us free from the guilt of sin and the slavery of sin. Jesus' blood produces eternal redemption, not just an external ceremonial purification. So a lot of the rituals that they would perform throughout the year, they would have the ashes of the heifer. So if, as a priest, if you became unclean, you could go take the ashes, apply them and wash, and you would now be clean. So it was an external rite to make you clean to continue to serve. But none of that could clean the conscience, could actually change your heart, could actually remove sin. Only the blood of Christ can forgive / remove sin. And now your conscience is clean. You can now enter into that relationship with God. You as a priest can enter into the holy spaces and offer worship to God. Verse 15. Therefore, he, Christ, is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them. Make my screen bigger here, 1 second. That redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. Let's pause there just for a minute. Many people have asked, how was Abraham? How was Isaac? How was Adam? How were they saved? Because whether it was the patriarchal or the mosaical, the blood of bulls and goats cannot take away sin. This verse answers that for us. Therefore, he, Christ, is a mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. The power of Christ's blood is immeasurable. It cleanses us from sin. But God, through his vision, could see that Christ's blood would also cleanse those who were called under the old. And that's where you get this image of the year of atonement. Like, I don't love the image, but that you have this idea of them rolling up the sins, right? It's rolled up. It's passed over. But with Christ's sacrifice, it is forgiven, right? So in God's vision, he could see the future and the now. All right, verse 16. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. So, last will and testament. How many? Every one of you should have a last will and testament. If you don't, here's my PSA. Go get one. You need to have a last will and testament. You need to tell those you love how you want your things handled. But when does that will go into effect?
When you die.
When you die. So when my grandkids, hey, Papa, can I have your... Like, no, I'm not dead yet, thank you. I'm still using it. It's mine. I'm going to use it, right? When I die, my will describe how I want my things distributed. But up until then, they're still mine. So the principle being relayed here is that a new will has been enacted, right? When Christ died, a new will and testament, a new covenant was enacted. And it was acted upon his blood. It was enacted when he died, he was buried, and at his resurrection, he was declared by God to be the Son of God. He was declared to be a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. He entered into heaven for us, not with the blood of bulls or goats, but with his own blood, to make a final atonement for all sin. That doesn't mean universal salvation. It means the door is open if you choose to go through it. We looked at last week. You choose God. You are a free moral agent. You can choose to follow God. You can also choose not to. The way, Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way is open. You still must choose it. God will not compel you into his home. All right, verse 17. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not enforced as long as the one who made it is alive. 1 Timothy 2, verses 1 through 6. Let's explore this idea of a mediator very quickly. First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, and intercessions and thanksgiving be made for all the people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceable and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. 1 Timothy 2:3. This is good and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior. Verse 4, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Verse 5, for there is one God, and there is one mediator between God and men, the man, Jesus Christ, who gave himself as a ransom for all, which is a testimony given at the proper time. All right, a mediator is one who gets between two. Christ is acting as our mediator between us and God the Father. All right.
Harold, I
Yes.
guess I'm gonna feel personally responsible, you don't get to finish Hebrews.
Oh, we're finished.
I just think that 15, there's a lot being said there, and I think it's worth its own study. And I think that ultimately I'm on the same page with you about Christ's death and his blood impacting those from the Old Testament that you mentioned. This seems to read to me as a present tense, as a future tense, as opposed to applying there. I think we have other scripture
Right.
that I couldn't tell you where it is right now. It's more toward that end of the Old Testament, the forefathers.
I don't disagree. I do think, though, that if you, therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal. So this was the promise to Abraham. Eternal inheritance. Since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. So this isn't Christ's covenant that he's referring to here specifically. The first covenant, you could either say it's the patriarchal or you could say it's the Mosaical, depending on the context you choose to view it from. But it's not his covenant. It is, he's saving those under a previous covenant who were called. Those who were faithful. That's my reading of that anyway. I can see your face.
Well, I'm just
Couldn't take it, could you?
thinking out loud, so I'm not sure if I'm right, but therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant. To me, it's talking about the new covenant, but the blood goes back and cleanses those under the old covenant.
Yes.
Because it was not able
Right,
to.
right.
So
He is the mediator of a new covenant. I think we're all agreed
it
there.
says new covenant there.
Right, so he's the mediator of a new covenant. But the bottom of the verse, B part, says, has occurred that redeems them. The
Right.
them here would be those under, from the previous, from
That's
the
the
transgressions
difference.
committed under the
Yeah.
first covenant, which would be the old, in my reading. He's created a new that redeems the old.
I guess I was saying the same thing, but
Yeah. See, I know you. All right. How much time? We got 2 minutes. All right, let's read it, and then let's read it. All right, 9:18. Therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded for you." Verse 21. And in the same way, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent, that would be the tabernacle, and all the vessels used in worship. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. All right, we'll stop there. Good conversation. Any last questions in the 1 minute that remains? Any other comments? All right, we will go faster next week. It's good conversation. Hebrews is a very interesting study. All right, thank you guys.